Approach questioned. Is the president taking a wrong turn in the fight on terror? Stage setting. Sounding much like he'll run for president, Jeb Bush lays out his vision for America's place in the world.
She couldn't hear, but she didn't know that.
A new device that could help children who are deaf and hearing impaired. And White House vigil, calling them martyrs. People pray outside the White House for 21 Christians slaughtered in Libya. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, February 19th, 2015. Good evening from Washington. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. Tough talk from the president today as that three-day White House summit on countering extremism wraps up. But his critics say the approach of the summit is timid and the administration is too friendly with oppressive regimes. Chief White House correspondent Suzanne LaFrankie reports tonight.
Brian, the president said Islamist terrorists are desperate for legitimacy and urged Arab nations to do more to stop sectarian violence. But some critics say the White House is not going far enough.
On day three, the president opened with a repudiation of the terrorist propaganda.
The notion that the West is at war with Islam is an ugly lie. And all of us, regardless of our faith, have a responsibility to reject it.
The president urged the world to broaden its response beyond military action and to focus on community outreach to those most susceptible to radicalization.
When peaceful democratic change is impossible, it feeds into the terrorist propaganda that violence is the only answer available.
But Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, a Muslim and author on the battle for the soul of Islam, accused the White House of being too friendly with oppressive Muslim regimes and not open enough to democratic reformers.
The narrative is all about the victimization of Muslims in America and the adherence to sort of these allies like the Saudi regime, the Iranian theocracy, the Pakistani theocrats and others that prevents the reformers from ever having a voice at the table.
Jasser, whose parents fled Syria, calls the Islamic State the evil empire of today. He criticized the summit for being too timid in identifying the real villains in the recent violence. Jasser says Muslims must separate mosque from state.
Once you separate those things, you then take away the oxygen of those Islamo-patriots that want to die for the Islamic states, and you begin to promote liberty and embrace Muslims that want to die for liberty, for freedom.
Meanwhile, Congress is back in session next week. The House Armed Services Committee will have a full hearing on Thursday on the president's request to use military force against ISIS. Brian?
Thank you, Suzanne. At the White House, and Father Avelino Gonzalez is director of the Office for Interfaith Affairs for the Archdiocese of Washington. Saba Ahmed is an Islamic lobbyist and founder of the Muslim Republican Coalition. Saba, do you think the government approach, the U.S. government approach to countering terrorism will work?
I think it definitely needs to change. It hasn't been working for the last 14 years, so we definitely need to adopt a different strategy and involve Muslim Americans to fight the war on terror.
Father, what do you think?
About the policy right now?
Policies, yes.
Obviously, there's room for improvement. The current situation basically tells us that there's something really wrong about how we're engaging the Middle East. And I think that if we look at the leaders, the faith leaders, they can provide a wonderful opportunity to get insights that perhaps in a secular worldview is not going to have.
It seems like it is up to the faith leaders, yet the administration seems to deny that religion is even involved here, and that's kind of troubling. You've written that Islamic radicals misunderstand Islam. Shouldn't Muslims who have the proper understanding be a little more vocal about this? And what can they do, if anything?
Well, I think Muslim Americans have been trying to raise their voices against the ISIS threats. Definitely, they do not represent Islam, and they don't represent Muslims. But the voices have not been as loud as they should be in the media and in American politics. But that's where we're making our efforts. I think as the rise of Islamic extremism is going on, we have to address the ideology. You can never win an ideological war with military. So that's why I recently wrote an article about how we have to go to the core of the Islamic jihadist ideology. I mean, jihad just means struggle for God. And if you're struggling for peace and justice, that's the core of why you're supposed to struggle for God. And if you're not being very peaceful or just, then what's the point of the jihad? Like, that's where I have a huge issue with the ISIS ideology.
Father, you do interfaith work with Muslims. What do you think we as Catholics can do to offer some solution here or some help?
I think the marriage of faith and reason in the Catholic worldview provides a lot and brings a lot to the table. Remember one of the encyclical of St. Pope John Paul II on faith and reason. And Islam has a wonderful tradition of faith and reason in various points of the Islamic history. For example, the Caliphate of Cordoba in Spain, later on the Kingdom of Granada, where we get leaders, for example, Averroes, who married, or rather combine a philosophy from a Hellenistic philosophy into Islam. Of course, from the Christian tradition, from the very beginning, there was the marriage of faith and reason that's part of the Hellenistic culture out of which Christianity came out of. I think that shining the light on that important connection and marriage between faith and reason is a wonderful way forward, and I think the church can provide some leadership in that area.
And finally, Saba, I hear people say that the Quran talks about killing infidels. Can you clarify that?
You know, there are so many verses in the Quran. Sadly, we focused on the most violent. There's laws of war that were applicable at that time. But there are so many verses in the Quran that talk about dealing with Christians with justly. They're the people of the book. They're believers of Prophet Jesus Christ. I mean, for us to say that's absurd. I mean, Christians lived in peace during the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He had so many sayings about the rights of non-Muslims in Muslim territories. I think that's what we need to focus on and change our messaging when it comes to dealing with interfaith.
Yeah, we need to find a way to live in peace.
Yes.
Saba Ahmed and Father Avelino Gonzalez, thank you both for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, a threat made by Islamic State terrorists puts Italy on alert. That terror group said it will never rest until it conquers Rome. The Italian government is deploying soldiers across the country to guard against possible attacks. There is renewed concern because ISIS is now in Libya. Thousands of people are fleeing Libya for Europe, and most enter the continent through Italy. Now some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. The shock of witnessing the slaughter of 21 Christians in Libya through an online video is bringing many of us to our knees. Catherine Szeltner joined a faith-filled gathering outside the White House last night.
So guide me and lead me.
Prayers on the breath of those gathered here in front of the White House. People of different faiths and ages coming together to remember the 21 Egyptian Coptic Christians allegedly killed by the Islamic State in Libya. Those men killed for their faith aren't being called victims here. They call them martyrs.
Being Christians as well as they are Christians, we just appreciate that they set the ultimate example for us. They died for their faith in Jesus Christ.
Vigil organizers say it's important Americans pay attention to the recent attack.
We cannot live behind like big walls anymore. It's a small world, and if the Middle East became free of Christians, free of religious minorities, that's not going to be good for anybody.
This is not a political event. It's not divisive. People are here to simply shine a light in this time of darkness. Libya may be more than 5,000 miles away, but those here believe they're united in faith.
We're all one in Christ. So when our brothers and sisters around the world who are also Christians suffer for the sake of Christ, for the sake of their belief, it's just like we're suffering.
From the candles to the glow sticks, memories of those Christians are burning bright. At the White House, Catherine Szeltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Catherine. And rebel fighters are celebrating the withdrawal of Ukrainian forces from an embattled town where fierce fighting has raged for weeks. Meanwhile, the UN ramps up humanitarian aid for nearly 200,000 people who have now been displaced in eastern Ukraine. Many sleep in rail cars. They struggle to find enough to eat and to drink. Local markets have food for sale, but the UN's World Food Program says it's very expensive. Bread prices have risen nearly 30%, while meat and cheese prices are up by 80%. For the third time since October, Russian bombers brushed British airspace yesterday. The UK's Royal Air Force escorted the Russian planes away from the English coast. Prime Minister David Cameron says the planes did not enter UK airspace. He says Russia appears to be making some kind of point. Thousands of Argentines march in Buenos Aires demanding answers in the mysterious death of a prosecutor. 51-year-old Alberto Nisman was found dead the day before he was to present his allegations against President Cristina Fernandez to Congress. Nisman believes Fernandez and others reached a secret deal with Iran to shield officials allegedly involved in a 1994 bombing. That attack killed 85 people at a Jewish community center in Buenos Aires. President Fernandez denies the allegations. Yesterday's rally was held exactly 1 month after Nisman's mysterious death. Meanwhile, survivors and relatives of the victims of the bombing met with Pope Francis at the Vatican yesterday. They are asking the Holy Father to be a mediator between Iran, Israel, and Argentina. A scare in the air over southern India, but thankfully this story has a happy ending. 2 planes nearly collided while performing stunts today at an air show near the city of Bangalore. As hundreds watched, the planes from the Czech Republic's Flying Bull stunt team grazed each other. No one was hurt. Both aircraft landed safely, but the wing on one plane was damaged. In a culture that has hijacked the word choice, Pope Francis reminds us to choose God every time.
Fermati, scegli oggi, scegli.
In today's homily, Francis reflected on how it's easy to follow false, meaningless gods. He says it's because we have the habit of following the herd. The Holy Father says we need to stop and ask ourselves, which path am I on? He encourages us to examine our relationship with God and our family to make sure we're staying on the right path. Coming up, is another Bush positioning himself for the White House by distancing himself from his brother? And the release of a blockbuster movie reinvigorates the battle against pornography. Wherever there are men and women who have consecrated their lives to God, there you find joy. A tweet from Pope Francis today during this year for consecrated life. Thank you for joining us on this Thursday evening with the EWTN News Nightly team. I'm Brian Patrick. A former New York City mayor and presidential candidate makes some waves with his comments about President Obama. During a private dinner in New York, Rudy Giuliani said he doesn't believe the president loves America. In an interview today, the former mayor says he wasn't questioning President Obama's patriotism. He just rarely hears the president say how much he loves the U.S. Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, who is considering a 2016 run for president, attended that private dinner. Where would a third President Bush stand on foreign policy issues? For the first time since expressing an interest in running for president, former Florida Governor Jeb Bush gives us a glimpse. Wyatt Goolsby is here tonight with that story.
Brian, Jeb Bush has not officially declared he will run for president in 2016, but he is clearly setting himself up just in case he does decide to run. The question is, can he separate himself from critics who say he's just like his brother, George W. Bush?
Look, just for the record, one more time, I love my brother. I love my dad. I actually love my mother as well. Hope that's okay. And I admire their service to the nation and the difficult decisions that they had to make. But I'm my own man, and my views are shaped by my own thinking and my own experiences.
His comments came Wednesday at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, where he struck a balance between respecting the service of his father and brother while saying he would make decisions on situations neither of the former presidents had to face. Bush also answered questions about Iraq, saying mistakes were made by his brother's administration after taking out Saddam Hussein, but he said the troop surge in 2007 was the right decision.
But my brother's administration, through the surge, which was one of the most heroic acts of courage politically that any president's done, because there was no support for this, and it was hugely successful, and it created a stability that when the new president came in, he could have built on to create a fragile but more stable situation that would have not allowed for the void to be filled. Intelligence capability.
So far, Bush has led GOP polls for 2016, but some political analysts say his name could prove to be his downfall. Others tout him as a frontrunner in his party. Jeb Bush is known for signing pro-life legislation while governor of Florida, including a bill to try to save the life of Terry Schiavo. Bush converted to Catholicism in 1995. According to polls, it's likely whoever wins the GOP primary will run against Hillary Clinton. Some reports this week indicate Clinton has been holding private meetings with a range of experts on a presidential run. Brian?
Interesting race ahead. Thank you, Wyatt. Well, ahead of the 87th Academy Awards Sunday night, a Chicago-based company is busy making those shiny statues. Watch how 780-degree molten pewter alloy is transformed into Oscar.
Welcome to R.S. Owens & Company in Chicago, Illinois, where we manufacture the Oscar statues. My name's Joseph Petrie, and I want to show you how we do what we do. Let's go. These Oscars you're seeing right here, right now, will be on stage next month. This is our hand casting department. So now we start with a bare metal and melt it between 500 and 600 degrees. And he ladles each one individually into a steel mold. The next process in manufacturing the Oscar is where we remove the gate that we use for casting. Our company was started in 1938, and we've been producing our own molds for casting since then. The next step in refining our Oscar statuette is removing all the parting lines from the molding process. This allows us to refine the surface to ensure he looks as perfect as possible. This is our polishing department. This is where we take our statues that have been sanded and ground and we bring them to a mirror finish. Everything we do with Oscar is done entirely by hand. Here we are in our engraving department. This is where Louise White, who's been engraving our Oscars since the early 80s, actually puts a serial number on every one of them. We take Oscar from his raw state where he's been polished to a mirror finish, and we electroplate him through 5 different baths, bringing him to a 24-karat gold finish. This particular. Here we are in final assembly. This is where Oscar gets assembled before he's finally shipped out.
Up next, a new experimental ear implant could help deaf children hear for the first time. And the Vatican issues new stamps showing Pope Francis at his best. If anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. From today's Gospel, St. Luke chapter 9, verse 23. Thanks for joining us on this Thursday evening. I'm Brian Patrick, and common themes for this season of Lent are forgiveness, mercy, and conversion. It's good to have Dr. Jem Sullivan back with us to explore these themes through art. Now, you specialize in sacred art. What pieces come to mind when we talk about Lent?
At the beginning of Lent, the Church calls us to return to the Lord, to turn back to God with a heart of forgiveness and mercy. This beautiful painting from the National Gallery of Art is really a visual homily on what it means to return to the Lord.
The Return of the Prodigal Son.
That's right, The Return of the Prodigal Son by Bartolomé Esteban Murillo, who painted many subjects with this religious matter, but always on large canvases like this one. The painting is an example of what we would call a simultaneous narrative, where we see all of the elements in the composition on one screen.
There's a lot there.
That's right, but Murillo wants us to focus on the heart of the matter, the center of the composition, where we see the Father and the Son in this loving embrace, tender embrace of mercy and forgiveness. The Son is on his knees. He's begging for forgiveness from his Father.
He's pretty tattered, too.
That's right. His
He's been
clothes
through
are
it.
tattered. His feet are dirty. He is a symbol of all of humanity alienated by sin from God. He's a symbol of us as we make our Lenten journey back to the Lord in a spirit of forgiveness.
In sharp contrast, we have the repentant Magdalene.
That's right, the Repentant Magdalene. And this is another beautiful, moving painting by the French artist, Georges de la Tour. That's right, it's a moving image. And really what we have here is de la Tour is greatly inspired by the Baroque artist Caravaggio. He uses chiaroscuro, which is a sharp contrast of light and shadow. So we see this single source of light in the painting, a single candle that illuminates the entire scene. And this is an image of spiritual illumination that comes at this interior, quiet moment of repentance, conversion, and understanding of God's mercy. Mary Magdalene is bathed in this radiating light of God's mercy.
She's such a powerful image in history, too. This sinner that they were going to stone, and Jesus says, I'm not going to judge you. And she's at the foot of the cross when Jesus is crucified.
That's right, because she has had this encounter with the mercy of God's love. She now knows that when she comes to the Lord in repentance, she will encounter His great love and mercy. And this is what we're invited to do in Lent as well.
We can have that same encounter in Lent. Dr. Jen Sullivan, thank you so much. We appreciate you being
Thank you so much.
Beautiful sacred art. Well, researchers are breaking the sound barriers using an experimental implant. They're helping deaf children to hear. They recently presented their research, and Jason Calvi shows us how it's helping one little girl.
It rained hearts.
Meet 3-year-old Angelica Lopez. This is more than a preschool art project. Angelica and her parents are part of experimental research.
Round and round, round and round.
She couldn't hear, but she didn't know that. And I don't know, I just wanted more for her. I wanted everything for her.
Many deaf children can hear some with a surgically implanted device. It connects with the hearing nerve called the cochlear nerve, but it couldn't work for Angelica.
She was born without any cochlear nerves on either side.
Now Angelica is part of a small study at the University of Southern California. Surgeons gave her and 3 others an experimental device called an auditory brainstem implant.
It goes in deeper into the nervous system and gives a more scrambled pattern of information to the brain.
The device goes around the inner ear and delivers electrical stimulation directly to the neurons in the brainstem. But it's a riskier operation than putting in what's called a cochlear implant. At this age, children's brains are flexible and pre-programmed to learn language and communicate.
We hear with the brain, and that sound information's destination is the brain.
The research team says Angelica got the device at just the right time to make sense of the new sounds around her.
She's really clicking with the information the device is providing, and she's learning at an extraordinary rate.
Angelica? Walking down the hallway, carrying the little cup of water, she's startled when I called her name, Angelica.
And now her parents are hoping that one day she'll be able to speak as well as she can sign.
We've always had communication with the sign language and stuff, but now she's using her voice a lot more. She's talking, she's bossy. You know, her little personality is certainly emerging.
And researchers don't know if Angelica will be able to understand speech perfectly or speak as well as she can sign. But for now, she's their star student. And Brian, researchers are really hopeful that these students, these young people, are actually one day going to be able to talk on the telephone.
She's angelic, and her name's spelled exactly like our dear mother Angelica.
Exactly, a beautiful girl.
Thank you, Jason. Asian communities worldwide ring in the first day of the Chinese New Year today. This is the year of the sheep, also known as the year of the goat, sheep, or ram. That confusion comes from the Chinese character yang, which describes really several animals. Hong Kong holds a huge international parade with floats and performers from around the world. The 7-day holiday that started yesterday brings the world's second largest economy to a virtual halt. The Vatican issues new stamps of Pope Francis today. There are 4 of them. One shows the Holy Father smiling, another with his staff in liturgical red, and of course, Pope Francis with a baby. We know how he loves holding babies. The Vatican has its own postal service and an office that issues stamps and coins. They're now working on a coin to mark the World Meeting of Families in Philadelphia that the Pope will attend. That will be his final stop on his U.S. trip in September, which also includes stops here in Washington and in New York City. Well, until tomorrow, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, watch on YouTube. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick as we leave you with Ukrainian Catholic bishops celebrating the Pontifical Divine Liturgy at Rome's Basilica of St. Mary Major. Good night and God bless you.